Lucy Crawford had lived in the same neighborhood for over a decade, and in that time, she had made herself known as the biggest troublemaker on the block. With a sharp tongue and even sharper eyes, she prided herself on knowing everything about everyone, whether they wanted her to or not. But her real joy came from making life difficult for those she deemed unworthy of living near her. And in her narrow mind, that included Tommy Blackwood. Tommy had moved in only a year ago, but from the moment he arrived, Lucy decided she didn't like him. It didn't matter that he was polite, that he waved at neighbors, or that he helped carry groceries for the elderly woman down the street. In Lucy's mind, he simply didn't belong. She watched him constantly, searching for reasons to complain. If he played music in his backyard, she called it disruptive. If he had friends over, she claimed they were taking up all the parking. Even if he did nothing at all, Lucy still found something to scowl about. The worst part? Tommy never reacted. He never snapped back or gave her the satisfaction of an argument. He greeted her with the same calm smile every time he saw her, as if she were just another neighbor, not the menace she had made herself out to be. To Lucy, that was infuriating. She thrived on conflict, on being the dominant force in the neighborhood, and Tommy refused to play her game. His indifference felt like an insult. But if there was one thing Lucy knew how to do, it was escalate a situation. She started small, having his car ticketed for parking too close to the curb, even though it wasn't. She called in noise complaints that were completely fabricated. She even went so far as to spread rumors to other neighbors, implying that Tommy was up to something suspicious whenever he left the house late at night. Most people ignored her, but that didn't matter. She wasn't trying to convince them. She just wanted Tommy to feel unwelcome. Yet no matter what she did, he never reacted. And that infuriated her even more. Then one sweltering afternoon, as she sat on her porch sipping lemonade, she watched Tommy by his backyard pool. The crystal-clear water rippled as he relaxed on a floating chair, eyes closed, completely unbothered by her existence. It was the last straw. That pool. That stupid, perfect pool. The very sight of it made her seethe. She wanted to ruin it. She needed to ruin it. And just like that, a sinister idea slithered into her mind. She leaned back in her chair, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. She had just the thing for this. Something that would turn Tommy's peaceful retreat into a frozen nightmare. And this time, there would be no ignoring her. Lucy had always been the type to hold grudges, but this time, she wasn't just going to complain or spread rumors, she was going to take action. And she knew exactly how. A few weeks earlier, she had come across something unusual while browsing the internet. An industrial-grade chemical compound, originally designed for extreme temperature experiments, had caught her eye. When mixed with water, it triggered an intense freezing reaction, capable of turning an entire pool into a block of ice within minutes. The science behind it didn't interest her, only the potential for chaos. At the time, she had ordered it purely out of curiosity, not knowing what she would use it for. Now, she had a perfect target. She rushed inside and retrieved the container from her storage closet, her heart racing with excitement. It was a dense, white liquid, packaged in a heavy-duty plastic jug. The instructions were filled with warnings about proper handling and safety precautions, but Lucy didn't care about any of that. She only cared about one thing, destroying Tommy's pool. She watched and waited. Hours passed, the sun dipped lower, and then finally, her moment arrived. Tommy grabbed his keys and left, likely for work or errands. The street was empty. It was time. Clutching the container, she slipped through the side of her yard, squeezing between the fence panels and stepping onto Tommy's property. The evening air was thick and humid, but the only thing Lucy felt was exhilaration. She hurried to the pool, unscrewed the cap, and without hesitation, began pouring the white liquid into the water. The effect was immediate. The pool's surface rippled violently as the chemical spread. The clear blue water darkened, turning an eerie shade of white. Within seconds, frost spread across the surface like spiderweb cracks on glass. Lucy stepped back, watching in awe as ice rapidly formed along the edges, creeping toward the center. A sinister thrill coursed through her veins. This was perfect. If anyone were to dive in, they'd be in for a nasty surprise. Not just cold water, but actual ice forming around them, locking them in place. She almost wished she could be there to see Tommy's face when he discovered it. No more relaxing pool days. No more lounging without a care in the world. She had won. Or so she thought. A voice shattered the air behind her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Lucy spun around, her breath hitching in her throat. Tommy was standing at the edge of his patio, arms crossed, his usual calm expression replaced with something much colder. Colder than the pool itself. Lucy's breath hitched as she locked eyes with Tommy. For the first time since she had started tormenting him, she saw something different in his expression: anger. Real, undeniable anger. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, but she had nothing. The proof was right in front of her, the pool, now eerily coated in ice, the empty chemical container still clutched in her hands. She was caught red-handed. I was just, she stammered, stepping away from the pool. Tommy took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You broke into my yard," he said, his voice controlled but sharp. "And you poured something into my pool. What the hell did you just do?" Lucy swallowed hard, glancing down at the frozen surface. The water was no longer moving. A thin but solid layer of frost stretched across the pool like a sheet of glass, glimmering under the moonlight. This wasn't just a prank, this was dangerous. But Lucy wasn't about to admit she was wrong. She straightened her posture, forcing confidence into her voice. "It's your fault," she spat. "You think you can just move in here and act like you own the place? Like you're better than everyone else?" Tommy let out a humorless chuckle. "Better than everyone else? Lady, I've barely said 2 words to you since I moved in. You've been harassing me for a year, and I've let it slide. But this?" He gestured to the frozen pool. "This is criminal." Lucy's confidence wavered. She had spent so much time trying to make Tommy miserable, but now, for the first time, she was the one backed into a corner. She took another step back, her heel skidding against the icy ground near the pool's edge. "Stay back," she warned, lifting a hand as if she could command him. But Tommy didn't move any closer, he didn't have to. Lucy took another unsteady step. Then her foot slipped. With a startled gasp, she toppled backward, arms flailing as she crashed into the frozen pool. The ice beneath her cracked but held firm, trapping her lower body in the freezing sludge. A sharp, icy burn shot through her legs as the chemical worked its magic, rapidly solidifying the water around her. A scream tore from her throat. "Help! Help me!" Tommy stood over her, shaking his head. "You did this to yourself." Lucy thrashed, but the more she struggled, the tighter the ice clung to her legs. She could feel the numbing cold creeping up her body, stealing the warmth from her skin. Tommy pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Yeah, I need the police at my house," he said calmly. "My neighbor broke in and tried to destroy my property. She's currently stuck." He glanced down at her, a smirk barely tugging at the corner of his lips. "Literally." Lucy continued to scream, but Tommy didn't flinch. This time, she was the one helpless. And he wasn't lifting a finger to save her. Within minutes, the sound of sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the street as 2 police cruisers pulled up to Tommy's house. Curious neighbors peeked out from behind curtains and front porches, murmuring amongst themselves. It wasn't every day they saw Lucy Crawford in distress, and for once, they weren't the ones dealing with her nonsense. 2 officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the yard before falling on the bizarre scene in Tommy's backyard. "Lucy, half frozen into a pool of ice, her face twisted in shock and rage. Tommy, standing calmly beside her, phone in hand. One officer, a tall man with a skeptical expression, approached Tommy. "You want to explain what's going on here?" Tommy gestured toward the pool. "She broke into my backyard and poured some kind of chemical into my pool. It froze the water, and now, well, she's stuck." The second officer, a woman with sharp eyes, raised a brow. "And you just let her fall in?" Tommy shrugged. "I didn't touch her. She slipped on her own." Lucy, still struggling against the ice, shrieked, "He pushed me." Tommy let out a dry laugh. "There are security cameras all over my yard. Feel free to check them." The officers exchanged a glance before turning back to Lucy, who had gone from furious to panicked. "You need to get me out of here," she demanded. "We will," the female officer said, unimpressed. "But first, we need to figure out exactly what you did." She pulled out her radio and called for emergency backup while the male officer crouched beside the pool, inspecting the ice. "This isn't just frozen water," he muttered. "Whatever she put in here turned it solid in minutes." He glanced up at Tommy. "You got the container?" Tommy pointed toward the empty jug lying near the pool's edge. The officer picked it up, reading the label. His eyebrows shot up. "This is industrial-grade cryogenic fluid. This stuff is dangerous." Lucy's mouth clamped shut. The female officer crossed her arms. "So, let me get this straight. You broke into your neighbor's yard, dumped a hazardous chemical into his pool, and then, what? Expected him to just sit back and take it?" Lucy's lips trembled, but no words came out. The male officer sighed. "All right. We're gonna have to get emergency responders to cut her out of this before she gets frostbite. But once she's out," he turned to his partner, who nodded. "She's coming with us." Tommy exhaled, relief washing over him. Finally. As the emergency crew arrived, cutting Lucy free from the frozen trap she had created for herself, Tommy stepped back, arms crossed as he watched justice unfold. Lucy had spent so long trying to make him feel unwelcome. Trying to push him out. Now, she was the one being removed. And for the first time in a year, Tommy's home truly felt like his. Lucy sat in the back of the police cruiser, wrapped in an emergency thermal blanket. Her legs still felt like blocks of ice, the sensation slowly returning in painful, tingling waves. But the worst part wasn't the cold, it was the humiliation. She could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on her. People who had once tolerated her glares and gossip were now openly whispering, shaking their heads as they watched her sit in handcuffs. Some of them even looked amused. "How the mighty have fallen," someone muttered. Lucy clenched her jaw, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Meanwhile, Tommy stood near his porch, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking. He was simply watching as justice played out. That made it worse. She wanted him to react, to yell at her, to finally acknowledge her as an actual threat. Instead, he had treated her like she was nothing. And now, she really was. The officers finished collecting statements, confirming the footage from Tommy's security cameras. The evidence was undeniable. Trespassing. Property damage. Illegal use of hazardous chemicals. It was enough to guarantee she wouldn't be walking away from this with just a warning. The female officer approached Lucy. "All right, here's what's going to happen. You're being charged with criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and reckless endangerment. You'll be taken in, processed, and depending on what the judge decides, you might be looking at some serious fines, or worse." Lucy's breath caught in her throat. "Fines? But The officer didn't care for her excuses. She gestured for her partner to shut the door. As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, Lucy finally locked eyes with Tommy. For the first time in her life, she saw no fear, no frustration, no irritation. Just complete indifference. And somehow, that was the most painful thing of all. The days that followed were the quietest the neighborhood had ever experienced. Without Lucy Crawford sticking her nose into everyone's business, there were no sudden complaints, no unnecessary calls to authorities, no passive-aggressive notes left on doorsteps. It was peaceful. Tommy found himself enjoying his backyard in a way he hadn't since moving in. He spent mornings sipping coffee by the pool, now fully cleaned and restored to its former glory, without worrying about judgmental eyes watching from a distance. He even had a few neighbors stop by to chat, people who had once kept to themselves out of fear of attracting Lucy's attention. "She's always been a problem," one elderly woman admitted as she handed Tommy a basket of muffins. "Most of us just didn't want to get on her bad side. But you stood up to her." Tommy chuckled. "I didn't even have to. She did it to herself." The woman smiled knowingly. "Well, either way, we're glad you're here." That simple statement meant more to Tommy than he expected. A week later, he received a notice from local authorities. Lucy had been officially fined for her actions and sentenced to community service. The judge had been lenient, too lenient in Tommy's opinion, but the real punishment wasn't legal. It was social. When she returned home, the neighborhood had changed. People who had once tolerated her now ignored her completely. No one greeted her. No one acknowledged her presence. She had spent years making others feel unwelcome, and now, she was the outsider. Tommy, on the other hand, felt more at home than ever. As he leaned back in his pool chair, the summer sun warming his skin, he finally allowed himself a satisfied smile. Tommy got the peace that he finally deserved.